Uh, so hi, welcome. Um, so I'm Lonnie Berger. I'm the director of the Institute for Research on Poverty. For those of you who might not be familiar with us, we're one of 3 federally funded poverty centers. We're funded by the Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation at Department of Health and Human Services. And the poverty centers serve the purpose of setting a focused agenda for expanding our understanding of the causes and consequences of poverty and the effects of inequality and poverty, and then informing policy to alleviate them. So each year, IRP sponsors a New Perspectives in Social Policy lecture, and this lecture is intended to reach beyond familiar and well-exploited fields of poverty research, to challenge accepted paradigms, and to open paths to new research models and methodologies. So today, I'm honored to introduce as our New Perspectives speaker, Arthur Brooks. Arthur, as you probably all know, is the president of the American Enterprise Institute. He's also their Beth and Ravenel Curry Scholar in Free Enterprise. Prior to joining AEI, he was at Syracuse, and where he taught economics and social entrepreneurship. Before that, he was, which probably fewer of you know, a classical musician. So, Arthur's a true public intellectual. So he's a prolific writer, an exceptional modern thinker about culture, about society, economics, politics, and social policy. Writes really widely. His multitude of books and articles focus on the role of government, fairness, economic opportunity, happiness, and the morality of free enterprise. So his writings span academia, the popular press, mainstream media, and I happen to be a particularly huge fan of his New York Times column. And I'm sure many of you are aware that there's been this reinvigorated and renewed policy debate around poverty and poverty issues, and AEI and Arthur have played a big role in that. So with that, as far as format, Arthur's going to talk, then I'll introduce our respondent, Tim Smeeding, and then we'll leave plenty of time for questions. And with that, I'd like to welcome Arthur Brooks.
Thank you, Lonnie. I'm going to make sure that my mic is on. My mic, you can all hear me? That's a good start. I'm delighted to be here. I'm really thankful that you all turned out a little bit this afternoon to talk about this issue that we all care so much about, which is poverty. The title of the talk is Markets and the Poor, but really what I want to talk to you today about is abundance, is wealth. And I want to make 2 basic points today. The first thing the point I'm going to make is the moral importance of abundance. And the second point I want to make is about the danger of abundance. And I'm going to make a point about each one of these aspects, about the importance of abundance and the danger of abundance, that I think is probably going to surprise you because it's the opposite of what you're thinking. Now, I'm going to start, these are the things I'm going to go through. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my normative assumptions. This is what economists always do. You say, basically, here's my biases right up front, okay? The bias I'm going to make is a preference for the poor. Okay, now this is a weird thing when you're talking about free enterprise and abundance, but I want to tell you why my normative bias here is a preference for the poor as we talk about free enterprise. For the past 2 years, I've had a close personal collaboration with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who's helped me a lot. Has been a great teacher to me personally. We have a work that we do with AEI, my institution, the American Enterprise Institute, and His Holiness the Dalai Lama, to discover new boundaries in consciousness and economic activity, the moral importance of the free enterprise system. But I've learned a great deal from him, and I want to tell you about a conversation that I had with him that leads me to start off with this normative bias that I told you about a second ago. Last November, as I do every year now, I went to see him at his monastery in Dharamsala, which is in the Himalayan foothills in India, where he's been exiled since he was kicked out by the communist Chinese in 1959. It's been a long time that he's been there. And we were doing a summit, but I was talking to him before the summit, and I had been reading, and for years now I've been studying Tibetan Buddhism. Even though I'm a Catholic, I've been interested in the discipline. And I was reading something before that about the pillars of a happy life in Tibetan Buddhism. Okay, here's what they are. The pillars of a happy life are 4-fold. The first 2 are easy: spirituality and enlightenment. Okay, that sounds like the Dalai Lama, kind of, right? The third is a little bit more counterintuitive. It's living a happy life. It's enjoying your life. right? You need to enjoy your life. You have a moral obligation to enjoy your life, okay? Okay, that's good too. The last one perplexed me. The fourth pillar of a happy life, you know what it is? According to Tibetan Buddhism, wealth. Wealth. Now, how is that possible? I mean, the Dalai Lama is a penniless, renunciant Buddhist monk. He doesn't own anything. I mean, he flies private, but he, he doesn't own anything. So when I get up there, I said, Your Holiness, I'm confused. I mean, I'm with you that worldly satisfaction and enlightenment and spirituality are three pillars of a happy life, but wealth? What is that all about? He said, you have to understand the definition of wealth. I said, what is it? He said, to be wealthy is the ability and willingness to help other people a lot. If you don't have that willingness and ability, you're not wealthy. Now, what does this mean to me? This means that I didn't understand wealth right, because that's exactly right. And that's the supposition I'm going to bring to my remarks today. This is the supposition that I bring to my work at the American Enterprise Institute for Free Enterprise and about capitalism and the controversies in politics and what I write in the New York Times and everything else, and what I want to share with you today. So abundance. Why is abundance important? Why is abundance morally important? I remember the first time that I saw poverty. I grew up in this lower middle class neighborhood in Seattle, and there were people on public assistance, et cetera. But that's not true poverty. I remember I saw the face of true poverty for the first time when I was about 7 or 8 years old, early 1970s. And it was a picture. Some of you remember this too. It was a picture in the National Geographic magazine. Right? My brother subscribed. It was a picture of a kid in sub-Saharan Africa with flies on his face and a distended belly. This impressed an entire generation of Americans, by the way, who had never seen anything like this before. It was a picture of a boy my age who was going to starve to death, and there was nothing I could do. I was completely helpless to do anything about it. That kind of poverty was shocking to a whole generation of Americans. And it stayed with us in a way. I thought about it periodically through the years. I grew up, I went to college, I dropped out of college, kicked out, splitting hairs. I went on the road as a musician. I went through my life. I got married, I started having kids. But periodically, as I went through my kind of ordinary American life, I would think back to that kid and ask, what happened to him? Okay. Well, I didn't study in the ordinary sequence of events. I actually did my bachelor's degree by correspondence when I was in my late 20s. And I graduated from college when I was about 30 years old. This is not the typical path to what I do here today. But what that freed me to do was to pursue this big question that I had. When I was on the road as a classical French horn player, I was traveling a lot around the world, including in the third world. And I had this question that was in my mind. Not why are some people poor? Why do some people stop being poor? Right? That's really what I wanted to know. So on my own, I started studying this question. And when I was studying this in my 20s, I learned something really shocking that changed everything for me. It led me really to where I am today. It changed my life. I wondered about that kid. I wondered about, world poverty, and I thought kind of what everybody thinks. If you ask the average American, has poverty gotten better or worse since the 1970s? 70% of Americans will say it's worse. 70% of Americans think there's more hunger in the world than there was in 1970. Here's what I learned. From 1970 until today, the percentage of the world's population living on $1 a day or less has decreased by 80%. This comes from the work of a Catalan, from a Spanish economist named Xavier Salí Martín. He teaches at Columbia University with a colleague named Max Pinkowski at MIT, who have estimated the percentage of the world's population living at starvation's door, $1 a day or less. 80% less than when I was a child. Now, you got to join me in thinking that's a miracle. It's not just a little thing. 2 billion of our brothers and sisters have been pulled out of poverty since I was a child. For the first time in human history, it's the greatest anti-poverty humanitarian achievement in the history of the world. And it happened in my lifetime. So I thought to myself, how do I get that to happen again? How do I get the next 2 billion people out of poverty? I want more, right? What explains it? This is my vision quest intellectually, is to find out what explained that. What made that happen? Okay, now, it turns out that it's not the usual suspects. Love or hate the United Nations, that's not what did it. Or the IMF, or the World Bank, or U.S. foreign aid. Like it or hate it. I like it, but that's not what did it. All responsible economists understand, and this is a nonpartisan point, left, right, middle, all mainstream economists understand that it was 5 forces that pulled 2 billion of the least of these, our brothers and sisters, out of poverty since I was a kid. Here are the forces: globalization, free trade, property rights, the rule of law, and entrepreneurship. It was effectively the American free enterprise system spreading around the world after 1970 that pulled billions out of poverty. Now, I'm not saying, and nobody responsibly would say, that it's perfect. There's still lots of people in poverty. Free enterprise isn't perfect. Markets fail. It's not the only thing that matters. Even Adam Smith knew this, by the way. 1776, he publishes The Wealth of Nations. 17 years earlier, he wrote what he thought was a more important book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, in 1759. Adam Smith knew morals come before markets, okay? But markets matter, not just to us, but to the poorest people in the world. Now, again, let me underscore the nonpartisan nature of this point. Let me give you a quote from President Barack Obama. Quote, "The free market has created more wealth than any system in the history of the world. It has pulled billions of people out of poverty," unquote. I remember it because he said it to me on stage at Georgetown University last May. I said, hallelujah. Progress. Progress. This is something that changed my life because I want to work for this. When I go on college campuses today, I start by talking about the nature of wealth, which is the ability to help people a lot. And how do you do it? By being a warrior for the poor. And to be a warrior for the poor at a mass scale, you got to have a system that works while you sleep. See, alms for the poor are good for your soul. And maybe they'll get you into heaven. But you have to have a system that works notwithstanding what's going on with your own personal charity. And the only system that's ever done it, and the only system that ever will, is the free enterprise system that we have to be in favor of without shame and without apology all the time, and to make sure it works for everybody, because friends, it doesn't work for everybody right now. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later. That, in a nutshell, is the first point I want to make. That's the moral importance of abundance, which is not morally important for anybody in this room. It's morally important for the people who are not in this room, because they can't be here. The reason I want you to join me in the fight for free enterprise is because I want you to join me in the fight for the world's poorest people and find a way to share it with them more and pull more of them out of poverty. That's the first point. Here's the second point. It's dangerous. Abundance is dangerous. Not for them, for you and for me. Let me tell you about a study that had a big impact on me 2 years ago. And it wasn't written 2 years ago, but I found it 2 years ago. It was actually published in 2009 in Perspectives on Research on Personality, which is a social psychology journal, an influential social psychology journal. And it was written by 3 professors at the University of Rochester. And again, this is not my field. I'm a small country economist. I'm not, in the big world of the social psychology experiments, but boy, oh boy, when I read this study, it did have an impact on me. These 3 researchers at the University of Rochester, they were doing experiments on people's goals. They were looking at students and the goals that they had in life, and they wanted to see how the goals they had in life matched up with the satisfaction that they got in life. That's an interesting study, isn't it? I mean, what are your goals? Are these the right goals to make you happy? So how did they do it? They started off by looking at a sample of graduating seniors, 22-year-old kids. And they said, imagine your life 5 years from now, and you're happy and successful, okay? Get it in your head. What are you doing? Now, it's a great example of how to back out people's life goals, because they didn't say, what are your goals? They said, you're happy, what does that mean to you? And then they did a good analysis of what the kids said, and they tried to ascertain the primary goals in the kids' lives, and they found that there were two kinds of primary goals. Now, of course, the kids had lots of goals. I want to be successful, I want to be happy, I want to this and that. What are your primary goals? Two kinds of primary goals, 50-50, basically, in the sample of kids. Number one was, I want to be rich and famous. Okay? Not exactly that crass, but they were what they called exogenous goals. Exogenous goals were about money and things and power and fame. Stuff of the world, basically. Okay? The other half had what they called endogenous goals. Okay? Now, why exogenous and endogenous? Because they had to get tenure or something. And it was, and endogenous goals, I want you to remember this because I'm going to use this word again in just a second. Endogenous goals were about relationships and love and people. Half the kids had endogenous goals. By the way, most of the kids with exogenous goals were men, and most of the people who had endogenous goals were women, but not entirely. Endogenous goals for women. They basically said, I want to have close friendships. That's how I'm going to know if I'm successful. I want to be close to my family. I want to have a good relationship with God if they were religious. They said, a lot of them said, I want to be married, which is weird because you don't think that, except that privately, a lot of people say that's, it is something they would like to have that close relationship, that married relationship. Okay, so that's what they said. Now, why did that have such a big impact on me? Because of the way that the study turned out. They came back 5 years later and followed up. And what do they find? Good news and bad news. First, the good news. All the kids hit their goals. They all hit their goals. The kids who had endogenous goals, they wanted to have good relationships, they had good relationships. They had good friendships. They had good relationships with their family. They were religious if they wanted to be. And the ones who said they wanted to be married, by the way, were ordinarily either married or engaged. The kids who had exogenous goals were making more money than their peers. They were professionally really successful. They were working really hard. Good news. You're going to hit your goals, is what the study tells you. Okay? Careful what you wish for. That's what your mom taught you. Because the second conclusion wasn't so good. Wrong goals, worse life. The kids who had exogenous goals had high levels of stress and anger and low levels of life satisfaction and low levels of happiness. And the kids who had endogenous goals about money, about people and relationships and love, low levels of stress, low levels of anger, low incidence of stomach aches and headaches, high levels of self-reported happiness. Right goals, right life is what it came down to. Now, again, so what do I care, right? Because one is about physical abundance and the other not so much. Look, I'm a guy who runs the American Enterprise Institute. And I just found that if your goals are capitalism, you're going to have a worse life. Sort that one out for me, right? How do I deal with this? I'm on college campuses all the time, and when I'm dealing with a lot of undergrads, right? People think that colleges are just these, hot house of radical ideas. No. Kids will come up to me and say, I'm all in. I got it on free enterprise. I want to fight. I want to fight for the poor. But, I'm not so sure that this rat race of capitalism is so good for me. I'm not so sure that the hamster wheel is going to really make me happy. And, at first I thought, oh, you spoiled little brats, right, with all this poverty in the world. But then I heard it from my kids. See, I got a house full of teenagers. Pray for me, by the way. And they would say the same thing. And then I read that study, and I thought, I don't think I understand free enterprise. I think I understand poverty and how to alleviate poverty on the mass scale, but I don't think I understand the intrinsic nature of why free enterprise matters in my life and your life and our lives. How do I deal with that? How do I talk about it? How do I understand it, right? And it was kind of a little bit of an existential crisis for me, I won't lie to you, because I felt like I didn't know how to talk about my own field anymore, because I had learned something that I knew to be true, but I'd never really confronted. Now, this is about 2 years ago, and I was traveling a lot in those days to India. I go to India a lot for a bunch of different reasons, mostly because AEI has an India Studies program, which is dynamite. It's just If you want to study capitalism, go to India. It's the most interesting place in the world. You can go every 2 months and it looks different. It's developing so quickly. And everybody is an entrepreneur in these weird ways that we sort of take for granted here in the United States. So it's a very interesting place to study my field. And we have a vibrant program in South Asian foreign policy. It's terrific. But I also go because I love it. I also go because it's a spiritually uplifting and interesting place. So you can sit at the feet of the masters and ask the questions that I asked of the Dalai Lama. So I was going 2 years ago, and this was on my heart about capitalism and abundance and what's it good for. And I was traveling with this guy who works for me. He's an India scholar. His name is Sadanand Dume. And if you read the Wall Street Journal, he's the Wall Street Journal India columnist. So every 2 weeks he's got this column about India in the Wall Street Journal. And I was telling him my problem. I said, I don't know how to talk about it anymore. I feel like I don't understand what I'm dedicated to do. And he said, I have a guy you need to talk to when we get to India about capitalism. I said, you got a guy? What do you mean? And he said, no, seriously, this guy can sort out your problem for you. His name is Swami Gyan Muni. And I said, yeah. You want me to go talk to a Swami and ask him about capitalism? I mean, I'm pretty new age, but I'm not that new age, right? And he says, no, trust me. And so we did. We were on our way to Delhi. We got to Delhi, and we went to this temple called the Swami Narayan Akshardham Temple, which, if you've ever been to Delhi, it is the most amazing thing you've ever seen. It was carved out of sheer rock by 10,000 stone-cutting artisans working full-time by hand for 7 years. It was built in 2006, too. It's a wonder of the architectural modern world. It's really something. You got to see it. And I went to this place to see this Swami, who is the head Swami, by the way. Turns out they have a head Swami. And I was nervous because I didn't know if we were going to be able to understand each other. I mean, I figured he's going to speak English, but this is a pretty nuanced set of concepts here. Swami, is capitalism good for my soul? Right? And I saw him coming across this courtyard. It was like this big. It was this room. It was a hot day in May, and he's coming toward me, and I'm thinking, he's got, shaved head and a flowing orange robe. He's looking really mellow. And I'm thinking, how's this conversation going to go? And he gets about this far away, 3 yards away from me, and he stops and he says, how you doing? And I said, where are you from? And he says, Texas. So it's getting weirder. I've come to India to look for the eternal wisdom of a Swami about capitalism who's from Texas. And I said, tell me your story. And so he did. It turns out that his parents were petroleum engineers. They were immigrants to Houston, where he was born. And he was from a family that had exogenous goals. Okay? That's the money, power, and fame goals. His parents were very demanding that he work hard and make a lot of money, that he be successful in everything he does. And he said he felt the pressure. He graduated from high school when he was 16, valedictorian. He went to the University of Texas on a full scholarship. He graduated in 3 years, and he went on to do his MBA. I mean, imagine this is a Swami, right, with an MBA. And he did it in 1 year, and he got out and he went to work for McKinsey. And he said his first year, his salary was higher than his father's salary. And his father was very proud. He'd done the right thing. He said it was this great moment. Now, there were certain compensations. He didn't really have time to have a girlfriend or see his family or do anything but work. He was working 100 hours a week. And he did it for year after year. He made a lot of money, and he did it for 5 years. And he woke up on his 26th birthday, and he said, is this it? Just money? Am I going to do this for the rest of my life? I mean, it's good, but I feel like I'm missing a lot here. So he decided to go on a quest to figure out the answer. And he set himself up with the task of praying every day for the answer for 6 months. Okay? And he was a very pious Hindu. And at the end of 6 months, he had his answer. He took everything he owned and sold it and gave it to the poor and moved to India, and he entered a seminary, and 6 years later, he emerged a monk, a sadhu. Now, I'm very nervous in this conversation because I've come to ask him about capitalism. Imagine, This is a guy who gave it all up. And I know what he's going to say. Swami, is capitalism good? You know what he's going to say, right? I mean, by the way, he was calling me dude, right? And he's like, I know what he's going to say. Dude, it's a sham, man. Capitalism is a man-made prison. Give it up. Be like me. I asked him anyway, Swami, is capitalism good? And he said, dude, it's great. It is the only system in history that's pulled hundreds of millions of my fellow Indians out of poverty. Now, I'm on the other side, right, at this point, because I can't believe it. Looking at him, I can't believe it. I said, yeah, but look at you. You gave it all up. You gave it up. You can't convince me that money's not bad if you gave it up. He said, dude, you don't understand. Money's not bad. The problem is not money. The problem is attachment to money. Now, that sounds sort of Eastern, right? It's not. It's not Eastern. It's what you learned as a child. If you were raised in a Christian home, you will recognize the most misquoted scripture in the Christian Bible. You know what it is? Money is the root of all evil. Misquote. Here's the real scripture. First letter of St. Paul to Timothy, chapter 6, verse 10. For the love of money is the root of all evil. Attachment. The problem is not money. The problem is attachment to money. By the way, if you prefer the Old Testament, Ecclesiastes 5:10, he who loves money never has enough of it. Isn't that the truth? Every religious tradition teaches the same thing. Every secular ethical tradition teaches the same thing. Money's not the problem. Attachment to money. Why do we forget that, by the way? Why do we forget that? You knew that and your mother taught you that. Yet we do chase after these worldly things a lot, much to our peril. You know, and I reflect on this sometimes, and I actually think I have a solution. I think I have a reason for this. I think, believe it or not, I think there's a conspiracy. See, I'm a conservative, so I believe in conspiracy theories. And you know, what's the conspiracy? What's the conspiracy? If you watch TV or go to the movies or look at advertisements, what's the formula for happiness? What's the formula for happiness that you see in those advertisements? Here it is, in a nutshell. Use people, love things. That's the worldly formula for a happy life, right? Think about it. Think of all the impulses that we get. Use people, love things. Do that, you'll be happy. You know in your heart that's exactly wrong. Invert the nouns and the verbs and get the formula for true happiness. Use things, love people. Use only things and enjoy them. Love only people. That is exactly what Swami taught me as the formula for happiness. Abundance without attachment. Okay. Now, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't give you a little bit about what I think is the way to do that. See, you should have a money-back guarantee on getting something useful when you come to a lecture from an outside academic. What can I do to suggest how to live the principles of abundance without attachment? And I'm coming back, by the way, to poverty here in a second, because that's what motivated the whole quest here, was lifting people out of poverty here and around the world. But how do you get the non-attachment part of this while still being respectful of the morality of abundance? Now, here's the way to not do it. Just lower abundance for everybody, right? If you want less attachment, just take everybody's money away. Wrong, wrong. That might help you, ironically, with the money. It won't help the poor. It will lower the living standards for the poor. It will hurt the poor because remember, it is the free enterprise system functioning as it's supposed to function that lifts people out of poverty, where people can earn their success, where they're truly needed by a market, therefore by other people. So how do you do it? Here are two practices. Here are two ways to do it, okay? And if you do this, I honestly believe that starting this afternoon, you will start to reap the benefits. Practice number one of abundance without attachment. Think about the thing to which you are most attached. The thing to which you are most attached, okay? Give it away. Charity is an act of rebellion against attachment. It is unnatural because it asks you to detach yourself physically from things, and that's hard to do. For years, I did research on charitable giving. It was my main area of research when Tim Smeeding, who we're going to talk to later, we taught together at Syracuse for a long time. And this was my main area when Tim was helping me get tenure. This was the stuff that I was doing, was on charitable giving. And I did, pretty standard research. When taxes go up, do people give more or less? When people have more income, how much more do they give to charity? And I wrote books on this. And I wrote a lot of academic journal articles on this. But there was one result that I kept finding that I could never understand. Here's what I kept finding. I kept finding that the more money you give to charity, the richer you get. That's crazy. That's completely impossible, right? I mean, it doesn't make sense. You don't learn that the best way for you to make more money is just to give it all away. That's not what you learn. That's not an investment strategy that's plausible or that's prudent. And so I just basically didn't write about it. I mean, this is what you do. Your theory and your data are in conflict, so you throw away your data a little bit. But I couldn't get it out of my head. Right? I couldn't get it out of my head. So I was at a conference, and I was talking to a colleague who did research on the same area, but he was a psychologist. And I said, I got a data problem. I want to tell you about my data problem. And tell me what I'm doing. I'm screwing something up. I keep finding that the more, and by the way, I was doing this using decent techniques at the micro level, at the individual level, right? I was using models that, those of you who are economists, you'll understand these are called two-stage Tobit models because I had a censored variable in there. And they don't establish causality exactly. They just implicate something. They indicate there might be causality. And I did this on a time series across the United States looking at something called vector autoregression, which is a technique that doesn't prove causality, it suggests causality. So I didn't know for sure. So I was talking to this guy, I said, I got a problem with my data. I keep finding that the more money you give away, the richer you get. What am I doing wrong? And he said, nothing. We've known that for 30 years. And I said, what are you talking about? He says, oh yeah, no, I mean, we don't look at you get richer after you give your money away. We look at something much more important, which is that you get happier when you give your money away. And there's a huge body of research that when you get happier, it changes your brain chemistry and your self-efficacy and the way that you're perceived so that, of course, you become slightly more successful in pecuniary terms. Duh. You should figure that you give your money away, you get happier, you get more successful, you make more money. Ding. Light bulb goes off. And I start seeing studies every place that's showing this. The more money you give away, the more money you make. The more money you give away, the happier you get, the healthier you get. My favorite studies, they show that the more money you give away, the better looking you get. And these are weird studies. I mean, they do things like, this is all social psychological experimental work that has human subjects. And so they'll have like guys who come into the lab with their wives and girlfriends. And the guy with the white lab coat, he'll say, they're in one building, and he'll say, simple experiment, here's a pocket full of change. He'll give them a pocket full of change. And he'll say, okay, simple, you two as a couple, you walk over to that building over there, and my colleague is going to interview you for 10 minutes, and then you get to go home, and you get to keep the money. Simple. Really? Okay. Pocket full of change, jingle, 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 walking between buildings, and there's an alleyway between the buildings, and a homeless guy comes walking out, and he panhandles the husband. Hey, buddy, you got some change? He does. It's part of the experiment. He's got to make a decision. He does. They go on to the next building, and the other guy with the white lab coat says, okay, did you give the homeless guy some money? How much? Then he turns to the wife or girlfriend. How attractive do you find him right now? What are they looking at? The correlation between how generous you are and how much she likes you. And what do they find? The more you give, the more handsome you appear to your wife or girlfriend. So, news you can use. The bottom line is this. Practice number one. Do you want to celebrate abundance without the attachment that hurts you? Think about the thing to which you're most attached and give it away. Charity is the first practice. Practice number two. Stop thinking about the price of exogenous things. Start thinking about the value of endogenous relationships and invest in that. Okay? Remember, endogeneity. That's the whole sense of people and love and brotherhood. Invest your resources in that. How do you do it? Years ago, I've been married for 25 years. And years ago, 24 years ago, my wife and I, we were having this big argument about how to celebrate our first wedding anniversary, ironically. And the controversy was basically this. We had no money. My wife was working in a minimum wage job, and I was studying college by correspondence. And the checking account had like tumbleweeds blowing through it. It was so empty. And we figured we could borrow or scrape together just enough money to do one of two things. We could go away together to the beach for 3 days, or we could buy a couch. And we didn't have a couch because we were poor. And here was the controversy. My wife is from Barcelona, is all about the beach. And I'm a thrifty, practical American, so I'm all about the couch. And this is how it was going back and forth. Beach, couch, beach, couch, beach, couch. And so finally we compromised. We went to the beach. And that's why I've been married 25 years. No, that's not my point. We were looking at that. We were thinking about that 20 years later. And something occurred to us that was kind of weird. We finally got the couch, by the way. That was 3 couches ago. And I don't remember the color of that first couch. I don't remember what it felt like to sit on it. But I can tell you everything we did in every hour of that vacation at the beach. That's something you might call the paradox of things, right? The things that you think are permanent aren't, but the things that you think are evanescent are actually permanent. The physical things in your life go away, but the endogenous relationships with the people that you love stay with you forever. This is an iron law, yet it's a paradox. There's a lot of research that shows this, but there's also a lot of sort of practical marketing data that shows this as well. There's a MasterCard commercial. It's the most successful credit card commercial in the history of the industry. It's been running for 30 years, and it always has the same form. They update it every year. It always has a voiceover and no dialogue, but it has the same form again and again. You've all seen it. There's a guy getting into a car with a kid. And the voiceover says, beach ball, $3. Gas for the car, $36. 2 nights in a hotel, $250. The weekend at the beach with my son, priceless. It's just an ad, right? Yet it somehow speaks truth, which is why it's effective. Okay, there's a whole bunch of studies about, take kids into the lab and you give them a little trinket or you give them, some way to call a friend and which actually creates more utility. I could give you all those experiments, but I don't need to. Let me bring this home to you in a way based on one of the deepest experiences that I've ever had. I have these 3 kids, and my middle son is named Carlos, and Carlos is 15. And every family's got a Carlos. Carlos is always running some sort of a racket, right? He's, the principal of the school is on the phone. Do you know that your son Carlos and his friend Feldman are running an illicit reptile selling ring? It's like that kind of thing. It's like everybody's got a kid like this, basically, right? So when there's something up, I'm very defensive. And 6 years ago, Carlos comes and he says, Dad, I've been thinking about Christmas. This is in the fall. And I'm immediately on my guard because I know this is not in my interest, whatever it is. Yes, okay, what's I'm trying to distract him. It's good to have Christmas in your heart all year round. Carlos, that kind of, no. Carlos says, no, I don't want anything. I've been thinking about it. And really all I want this year is I want to go away alone with you fishing. And I'm thinking, that costs 19 times as much as a bike. The father of the year, right? No, but I didn't say that. I said, okay, let's do that. And we've done it every year since. That's all we do. And I could give him a bike or a scooter and it would be broken and forgotten after 2 months. But I can tell you everything we've caught every year. And he says, Dad, when you get older, thank you, I'm going to take you. And I bet he will. This is the principle. Principle number 2. Invest in the endogenous relationships with people that you love. And by the way, the people that you want to love. That's one of the secrets of abundance without attachment. Okay, so where are we? Before I turn it over to Tim. The first part changed my life. You know, I didn't know what I thought about free enterprise. I didn't know what I thought about capitalism and money and wealth and abundance and all this. But it is unambiguous that if you're a warrior for the poor, that if you want to lift up the world, it doesn't matter what your politics are. If you're a progressive, be a progressive. If you're a conservative, be a conservative. It doesn't matter. We all need to work together to lift people up with the only system that's ever done it, while trying to help this system to reach more people and to achieve greater fairness. What that means is up to you, but we need to be in on this together because poverty matters a lot and there's still too much of it. But at the same time, abundance is dangerous for each one of us. And that's the reason we need to practice the principle of non-attachment with the practices that I've outlined here or any others that work for you. And if we do this, by the way, we get a third benefit, and that third benefit is bringing the world closer together and destroying the polarization that's driving us apart. You deserve the courage of your convictions and your political opinions. I respect you for that, and I think it's important. And I'm glad that I have mine too. But really, what matters is our ability to help other people more and to lead better lives and to live them together. Abundance without attachment is a new way of thinking about these things that we can all fight for together, that goes beyond right and left, that can actually lift up the world and create a better country and spread it around to share it with others. So for that, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tim. My last words to you are simply, I appreciate very much you giving me a little bit of your time and for the work that you're doing, and especially for inviting me here to this beautiful and important school. Thank you.
So thanks, Arthur. I suspect that's generated quite a bit of thought, and I'm looking forward to a lively discussion. First, Tim has the formidable job of responding to Arthur. So Tim Smeeding is the Arts and Sciences Distinguished Professor of Public Affairs and Economics here at UW-Madison. He's the immediate past director of the Institute for Research on Poverty. He was, very well known for he was the founder of the Luxembourg Income Study. He's written on just about every social policy issue, every domain of social policy you can think of. His current work is focusing on income inequality, social and economic mobility across generations, consumption and wealth, poverty in national and cross-national context. And I'm thrilled that he is willing to comment on Arthur's talk today. And please welcome Tim.
This is a hard act to follow. You figured that out, huh? I got an outline of what Arthur was going to say, and I think I guessed pretty well what it was. So I want to talk about markets and the poor, and I have some reflections on Arthur's lecture and his emphases. And I want to talk also about the moral importance of abundance, but I want to put one word in there. Moral importance of shared abundance, which I think fits with what Arthur wants to do too. So first of all, let me tell you, I've known Arthur. He was a colleague and a friend. He's done several really important things lately, which is why we were attracted to him here in Madison and why he's forging a good middle ground between those two political poles. He's got a lovely AEI Poverty Studies page, which he actually paid me a little bit to review, and I actually thought it had pluses and minuses, but overall it was good. If you read the papers yesterday, the Gates Foundation is now suddenly investing in the United States. In other words, they've solved the rest of the world's problems. They're investing in the United States, and not just in education. They have a new partnership on mobility up from poverty. And Arthur's a member with David Elwood and others are a member of this group. And this won't be the last thing I think that they'll do to look inward and see what they can do about the issues in this country. And then finally, he's one of the people behind something you might have heard about, what I'm going to talk a lot about today, at least those three words in red. The Brookings scholars and AEI sat down and got together, some people from the left, some people from the right, but reasonable people. They decided they'd make some compromises, and if they did, you wouldn't get everything you wanted, but we'd be better off. And they have this lovely blueprint. And the blueprint is about opportunity, responsibility, and security. And I'm going to try and paint Arthur into those words. Okay. His basic message is about the moral importance of shared abundance. And opportunity is key. Opportunity to compete, to trade under a set of rights and rules of law, and to have a chance to start something and pursue your passion. And these have all helped markets move people up from poverty throughout human history, and most recently in the BRICS, that's Brazil, Russia, India, and China, and the Asian tigers, where poverty is in fact dropped like a stone, severe poverty. They've built wealth, okay? But, and this was part of what he said, we still need to expand opportunity, skills, employment, and incomes for the bottom 40% of the population. The World Bank, the OECD, this big shared prosperity is what they call it. And shared prosperity is about what's happening to the people at the bottom of the pile. Not the very bottom of the pile even, but the bottom 40%. And I think this is very important, something to do. Another thing which I agree with is responsibility and agency are important. We need to pursue abundance, markets and jobs and happiness, and avoid attachment and dependence. That's part of American values and the American culture. And this is who we are and what we do, okay? So I'm all for all that, right? And so I think that upward mobility by and for the poor is determined by two forces, and those two forces are differences in opportunities. We can create opportunities or take away opportunities. We can give kids and people a chance or a second chance, or we can't. But then they have to take advantage of them. Agency is important. You have the responsibility to do something, okay? And then finally, the last word there, which is something that is a little more fragile in my mind, is security. And here it's the role of giving away your wealth versus what the public sector does, okay? And I like to think of the public sector not as taking money from one and giving it to the other, but as investing in people, in their growth, and their chance to escape poverty. So that's where I'm going. So here's some examples. How about the USA? We're not there yet in terms of opportunity. You haven't listened. If you've had your head in the sand for 2 years, maybe you've missed these words, but they're talked about by everybody. And the answer is a steady, good-paying job and rising living standards for everybody, the shared prosperity. That is our goal. So here's an economist, me and Arthur, we're economists, and we talk about globalization and free trade. And the first thing you learn is that if you have free trade, the winners do so much better than the losers that the winners can compensate the losers. But the winners don't compensate the losers. That's the problem. It's not shared abundance. The winners take all and they walk off, and they should listen more to Arthur. Is that okay, Amelia? Am I saying, did you say that to Amelia?
You literally just said that.
Yay! The rule of law. Well, laws are important, but there's equality and inequality in law too. And if you think about the way we treat the ex-incarcerated, who I'll mention a little bit later in this country, without giving them a second chance and without giving them an automobile or a chance to vote or an opportunity to take a job, I think that's a big problem. So that's another one. In entrepreneurship, I think the largest share of startup funds for personal businesses in the United States is parental and family wealth, not microloans. Microloans may work a little bit in Europe and so forth. So there's some differences, but I like those things. But our big problem then is it's about poverty, but it's also the middle worker. The wages of middle-class people are no longer correlated with productivity increases in the nation, where market work is the most important thing. Kathy Eden and my colleague Sarah Halpern Meekin, who may or may not be here, wrote a wonderful book called It's Not Like I'm Poor, about the earned income tax credit. It's like, I earned that. I belong. If you don't work in America, you don't belong. We value work. We work longer and harder than virtually anybody else anywhere. on Earth, at least in the rich world. Okay, I'm not too sure about parts of the poor world. But that's where you get respect. That's why you feel you belong. I earned that. So I think that's really important, and that's an important part of the solution, but it's got to work for everybody too. Okay. Let's see. I've almost got this down. But here's our problems, okay? Skill bias, technological change, and rising capital share. As I told the National Academy of Sciences 2 years ago, when I finished, what about distribution, Tim, and what about property? I said, who owns the robots? Those people are doing quite well. And there are gains from that. Robots are good. But what about the people who used to produce what the robots did? What do we owe them? What sort of investment can we help them make so that they can learn to run the robots or they can benefit somehow from the free enterprise system? I do think our executive pay and compensation is way out of line. The corporate boards reward you to reward yourself. Okay, so instead of investing in building something new, as Joe Stiglitz says, you invest in buying back your own company stock to keep its price up, because if the price of stock is high, guess who gets rewarded? You do, okay? Our financial sector is 8% of GDP. That's too much. Robert Solow thinks that's too much. Angus Deaton thinks that's too much. How come the Canadians can do it cleaner and better for 4%? Where does this other 4% go? Who does it help? I think those are important questions. And then, most important in the United States, which is unlike a lot of other places in the world, we're not going to go back to unionization and all that. But a worker voice in employer relations, scheduling practices, employment contracts, work sharing, things like that are really important. And there's no Labor Party in America. There's no labor voice. It has no voice. And so it's weak and it can't speak for itself. So this brings me to, where do we stand today, right? Here we are in a country with 4.9% unemployment. That's great. How come everybody can't get a job when can't find a good job when things are that tight? Wait a minute. A lot of those people are underemployed. There was a nice piece in the Times last week in the Atlantic, about something like 20% of recent college graduates are underemployed. They're working at jobs that don't require whatever they got trained for, but their jobs the best they can find for now, okay? Another issue which conservatives have addressed, but discouraged workers, not the labor force, another thing. We have far few people in the labor force, and one of the reasons may be the incarceration issue, which I'll bring back up. Are people wanting to take good jobs well matched by skills or geography? Not always. There's actually some conservatives that David Brooks pointed out have this idea of new Homestead Act to give people some insurance and help them move to places where there are jobs. Now here's the problem. Husband and wife both working, one loses their job. So you're going to give up, there's a job over there. As my father used to say in the Great Lakes in the Depression, write if you find work. Everyone, when you get on a train or a bus or something, you went somewhere, write if you find work because we're going to come and work. But now it's, am I going to move? Are we both going to move when we have to give up the only job we've got to go to some place where neither one of us have jobs? So it's difficult. I had a wonderful. I won't tell I'll tell it later. I don't have to tell too many stories. I haven't got too much longer here. How many people looking for jobs are ex-incarcerated? Well, there's a new paper that's about to come out, my colleague Mike Masolia, but the bottom line is there are about 5 million people in America and 2.1 million African-American people who have been incarcerated and who have committed a felony, been jailed, who have to tick the box on the box that's not banned that yes, they made a mistake once. Those people are stuck in the middle of places like Milwaukee. They can't find jobs. No one will hire them. And we're telling them now, well, we're going to take away your food stamps because you don't have $129 a month worth of food because you can't find a job. Well, at least the honest conservatives in this group that Arthur's associated with are saying, well, let's find out why they don't have jobs. Why don't we try that? Why don't we find out why they don't have jobs? They don't have jobs because there is no job and no one will hire them. That's different, okay? How many jobs do we have that pay less than $13 an hour is another question. We'll see that in a minute. How do shortages of workers with a post-secondary degree inhibit growth? It inhibits growth, and if you've got a bachelor's degree or above anywhere in the world, you know where the highest return is? United States of America. Why? Because our supply is far underwhelming the demand for higher educated people, okay? And all of these try and tell us why real wages aren't rising. So here's, whoops, that was wrong. There we go. These are how we create jobs. This is a picture that many of you have seen. These are the $13 an hour jobs. This is Wisconsin and the United States. We got a lot of those low-level service jobs. We chew people out, we spit them out. We tell them to show up at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. We tell them not to punch in. If they're supposed to start at 8, don't punch in till 10 and then leave at 2 because some economists like Arthur Wright ran a regression analysis and said that this is your optimal use of labor. The mid-wage jobs, this was Wisconsin. This was a big breadbasket manufacturing state. We've lost even more of them since then. They just haven't bounced back, and they're not coming back. Manufacturing employment in this country has been falling for 30 years. It's not going to turn around. Yes, we have specialty manufacturers. Yes, there are a few things that you can do and keep, but you're not going to walk out of high school and into manufacturing job. And in higher wage jobs, we're doing better even now. So this is how the jobs have changed. That's one thing. Now here's how the wages have changed. This is David Otter, my favorite economist. I think he's spoken here 3 or 4 times. And this is the evolution of wages by education level since the late 1960s. And you can see for men, some college or less, you haven't gone anywhere since the late 1990s. The bachelor's degree things have even flattened out. But I'm speaking to the choir in this room, most of whom have or soon will have a post-secondary degree. You're doing great. Women follow the same pattern, a little more growth, but then a flattening out too, okay? Now, when people say, a lot of people talk about diverging destinies. How about kids? How do kids have a fair shot? Well, go back here? Oh, I see. I'm sorry. I can't wander like Arthur. I didn't get wired. So what, if 2 PhDs marry 2 PhDs, or 2 doctors marry 2 doctors, that line and that line get together and they're really well off. They have 1 or 2 kids. They invest in everything for those kids. There's nothing they can't have or won't have and so forth. And if you're a single mother over here, or if you're a single guy who can't make a living and isn't really partnerable, forget marriageable, you're over here. So this is the world we live in. This pattern, you see it in a lot of other countries, but not as extreme. And finally, I really like this OECD report. I spent last year on leave, and I was at the OECD. And if you look at inequality here, and numeracy, this is a PISA score that's pretty good across, the literacy scores get a little messed up across all countries. You find that if your parents' educational background is high, okay, there's no numeracy states that say no matter how much inequality you have. But if your parent education background is low, here's what happens. The more inequality you have, the less numeracy you have. The more people you're dragging along, the fewer people are going through school. And if you don't believe this is true, look at this last picture. This is one of my favorite graphs, okay? These are 25, 53, about 4 different cohorts who attained an associate's degree or higher. You could do it just with a bachelor's degree. Now you look at, this is our country right here. Back when we were dealing with yellow bars, Canada was a little higher, but otherwise we were killing the world. That's my generation, or actually a little behind mine. I'm older than you think, okay? But then we sort of flattened off. And then every other one of these countries, Korea, Canada, Ireland, Norway, United Kingdom, all these other countries, they're accelerating. Each successive generation has more education and training, is more able to compete in the world, and we're just not doing that. We're just not. That's it. We're not. We made small progress recently, so the graph looks a little bit different than before. The blue line is a little higher than it was the last time, but we're just not doing it. And you can see these graphs in China and in India and in Indonesia, and they're lower numbers, but they're all going up in the same way. Okay? So people are getting ahead. You understand. The message is learn something, develop more skills. You can compete better. You can produce more abundance. But we're not doing that very well. And finally, how about security? The world we live in, there's little job security for low and medium wage workers or his or her family. This is just, we don't have it. Working, the trouble of one of the most pernicious things you find out there and why there's so much frustration in the American economy is people don't no longer believe that if I play by the rules and work hard, I'll get ahead. Because it hasn't worked. It hasn't worked for 5, 6, 7 years. It just hasn't worked. Now, what we found we can do, believe it or not, we should be proud of this, we can float the bottom of the barrel. We can help prevent poverty with targeted programs like the Earned Income Tax Credit and Food Share, SNAP, that actually work. But if we want more people to work and get out there, you have this trade-off. Agency, you're an able-bodied individual without kids. You should work to get those benefits. Fine. But if you can't find a job, give that person a job. Have a job of last resort. And I'm not talking about a public sector leaf-raking job. I'm talking about a job in private enterprise. I'm talking about a serious revitalization of our infrastructure. I'm talking about the internet backbone that northern Wisconsin needs, and we could go on, okay? So we need better opportunities for the kids of these workers, the middle class and the poor, better health, education from early child care on, and a good safety net to ensure upward mobility, not to ensure attachment, but to ensure upward mobility. And in providing the security, I think that charities and non-governmental organizations and people who give to people are great, but they're complements to the public sector. They're not substitutes. They are not substitutes. There aren't enough charitable people, a la Arthur, to fill the holes that we've got, okay? So in the end, I think Arthur and I have the same goals: opportunity, responsibility, security. We would probably pursue them with different means and emphasis. But we could cut a deal, and we could find a better way than we have now that would improve opportunity, responsibility, and security over what we have. Now, will the federal and state governments make such a deal? I don't know. We'll find out in a couple of years. But I'd like to think that there could be a better world. And I just want to thank Arthur again for coming here. As you can tell, I'm way out of my league responding to Arthur. I use the usual academic charts and whatever. Arthur is brilliant, and he's a smart guy, and he's a good guy. And I'm very proud that he could come here and I could respond to him. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll open it up for questions for both Tim and Arthur as you see fit, and there are people coming around with microphones.
Interesting. So if I were to encapsulate the two presentations, both fans of free enterprise, but I hear Tim with a long list of taxation policy and regulations that iron out all of the wrinkles in that free enterprise, all of the imperfections. How do you reconcile those two?
Thank you for that. And that's, one of the problems with actually not having colluded quite enough is that Tim wasn't quite expecting me to talk about swamis. I think he was expecting me to do what I did at Syracuse, which is being a professor of public policy. We basically both have lists. We have lists of things that we're trying to do. One of the things that he pointed out that I think it's important to emphasize is that we have the same goals, but we pursue them in slightly different ways. Not very different ways, actually, but slightly different ways. And you're right. I mean, he has a lot of really great ideas on how to as you say, iron out the wrinkles of the free enterprise system, which recognize, by the way, that the free enterprise system has market failures attached to it. And those market failures are severe in the cases of people at the periphery of society who disproportionately bear the brunt of those market failures. One of the things that my list would have a little bit more of is on the opportunity side, and again, he didn't de-emphasize this, but I talk about this a little bit more, particularly when we talk about trying to prepare people much, much better so that we can have not just a 5-year plan on ironing out these wrinkles, but a 20-year plan on making sure we're not still sorting out the same wrinkles 20 years from now. And we agree on this completely, I know. The biggest one of all is human capital development that I would have talked about if I were doing a full-on policy lecture on sort of hope policies and opportunity policies and help policies and safety net, et cetera. One of the things that I would talk about is if we don't want to be sitting here 20 years from now having the same conversations about American poverty, we better sort out the public education system in this country. And we better be realistic about the fact that we're creating a society that says that people who make less than $13 an hour have what we call dead-end jobs. And we have a cultural bias against people who don't go to college, and on and on and on. And we need to sort out those particular problems that are long-range strategic goals that should be both social and economic goals for our country. Number one. Number two is we have to have an entirely different way of understanding work. Tim brought up a really provocative and important point, which is the whole idea of helping people to move, right? I mean, it sounds so simple, right? Yet this is a major change in American society where people are less mobile than they've been before. You know, look, my own family was like one step ahead of the law, generation to generation, all the way to the West Coast when they had to stop. Why? Because that's how opportunity worked before we had a society that was largely in geographic stasis. And think what this means in the lives of poor people today. And this is just an example of what we would get into if we actually we had set our slides against each other to give you an example of this. If the plant shuts down in Kentucky and you're left without a job and you're 55 years old without skills, likely as not, you will find a way to get a disability diagnosis from a doctor for depression or back pain to get $900 a month until you can make it to Social Security. That's a huge problem. Not because it's waste, fraud, and abuse. I don't care about the money, but because it marginalizes the very person. It makes that person live every single day with the fact that he or she is not needed in our society. So the last point that I'll make, if we were doing this back to back, is that I think that we have to have a serious, full-on conversation, not just about how to help, but as we were discussing at lunch today, how we need to need poor people, which in point of fact, we don't in America today. And that's probably the biggest problem and the biggest policy problem that we have in the United States today is more policies that bring more people into the family, because a family is a group of people that need each other.
George, you're going to find the same thing as when I did this debate with Charles Murray on inequality. Arthur and I agree about too much. I totally agree with that. It was at a wonderful conference where a woman from Akron University talked about she taught human development, and she taught the capstone course in human development, and half of her students were non-traditional. They were older, a lot of single parents, a lot of second earners, and some young people, and they all would have a glass of bubbly and toast their degrees. And she said the next day they would realize there is nothing for anyone with a bachelor's degree to do in Akron, Ohio. There are no jobs there. No one's hiring people like that. They just aren't there. You go to Cincinnati, you go to Cleveland, you go to Columbus, you can get a job. Think of the situation we have in rural Wisconsin now, which is essentially supported by the Social Security checks of older people who are still there. The public services are going to contract because there aren't that many people there. And it's just really hard. Those people have to move. But it is hard to move. It was easier to move when it was just my father or just Arthur's father. That's who worked, and my mother quit the Federal Reserve Bank to raise 5 kids, and she followed along. But when you've got 2 workers, it is really hard. One of them loses their job, your standard of living is cut in half, and it's risky to pick up and move to who knows where in hopes of a job. But there could be some attractive things about this particular policy, which I think are good. So I'm not quite as much tax and regulation as you think, George. I've known George. Grab that Whippery thing right there about markups. I'm still reading your journal, your former journal, George.
So I really appreciate the AEI Brookings work and the debate and the discussion that's generated. So for what what can we do to help move that along? Those of us who are out here in the audience, sort of representing the general public or people who are interested but not necessarily part of those conversations, because I'm looking at that bottom bullet point about, well, what will they do? And so what can we do to help move that along?
So a couple of different things. Different things I'd like you to do. Number one is I need all of us to be more ideologically unpredictable. Okay? See, the polarization that's making this hard is because all of us are too predictable in our ideology. We've become consumers who are only Coke or Pepsi. Right? That's a huge problem because nobody has an incentive to do anything that's even remotely daring in public policy. They're responding to market incentives. I mean, it's like what the country is producing Sanders and Trump, my friends. It's not that some autonomous king or an evil scientist who created them in a lab, although it looks that way sometimes. It's us, right? And so the key thing is basically we need some philosophical ambiguity is what I'm asking for. And here's basically it. I'm not asking you if you're a progressive to not be a progressive, or if you're a conservative, if there are any in here, to not be a conservative, right? I'm asking you to be a weird progressive and a weird conservative. If you're a progressive, be the progressive who's crazy about free enterprise all the time. And if you're a conservative, be the one who's nuts about poverty and doesn't stop talking about it. Because that scrambles categories. Look, what are the stereotypes? Stereotypes are conservatives are really good on markets, but they don't have a heart for the poor. And liberals, they're really good about the poor, but they're soft-headed about economics. Those are the stereotypes. I'm sorry, and it's not fair, but those are the stereotypes. What if I could give you a way to meet the liberal ends with traditionally conservative means? Would you take it and bring the country together? Because if you could, guess what? They will respond to market incentives. That's number one. Number two, complain about this to your policymakers, especially those who are on your side ideologically. I mean, it's easy. If you're a big liberal, you can write to Paul Ryan and he'll go, yeah, guess what? I got hate mail from a liberal. You know. On the other hand, if you write to your Democratic congressperson and talk this way, it will be noticed. It really will. And so that's what I ask you. Again, the polarization problem drives all these problems down the line at the end of the day. And think about the incentives that we're given. If you were a marriage counselor and a couple came to you that was in love but had daggers drawn and didn't communicate anymore, would you say, okay, here's what you need to do. Fight it out as bitterly as possible and see who wins? No, that wouldn't make it better, right? You would actually try to band together around some sort of a moral consensus. And in so doing, you could take ideological divisions and turn them into a competition of ideas. But that, especially for those of us who are in this room, starts with us.
Next. I agree with that.
Hi. Something that you said, Dr. Brooks, confused me. You said you had to learn the idea of investing in your relationships rather than in the exogenous things. But wasn't the reason why you had to learn those things as a mature person that you had been taught the opposite all of your life under capitalist society?
You know, the answer, of course, is yes. Again, there's a conspiracy, my friends. Use people, love things. That's the conspiracy. See, capitalism is not enough. It's great. It's a miracle. I love it. I want you to love it too. But it's not enough. Capitalism is a machine. It's like a car. You can use your car for great good and you can use your car for great ill. It depends on your training and your values and your morality is what it comes down to. Look, capitalism can hurt us. That's the reason I talked about the non-attachment part of it. We're responsible for our own morals. We are responsible to act as our brother's keeper. That's the reason that we talk about these things that Timmy's bringing up. He's putting up these slides. He's talking about these things that are extra market interventions. Why? Not because we have to do these things, but because we should do these things. right? That's why we actually want to find a way to make work pay more, even though private markets left unimpeded probably wouldn't do so. Even though we can afford as a nation to leave 25% of the country behind, it's not the right things to do because those are our brothers and sisters. Capitalism is wonderful. Please love it, but it's not enough. We need your whole heart too.
I might add a little to that. You know, for about 55 years, college freshmen have been taking a survey. And the survey gives you two choices. This is why I went to college: to develop a philosophy of life or to get a good job. When I went to college in the 60s, develop a philosophy of life was winning 3-1. Now it's totally the other way around. The reason I'm here, I don't want to study liberal arts. I don't need to do all that stuff. I have to go get a job when I'm done because it's about a job. So and I hear this from Arthur, and I agree with it. That's not what, this isn't a jobs factory. I'm sorry, that's not what we're trying to do here, okay? This just isn't what we're trying to do at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. We want to push back knowledge and so forth, but we just can't, we don't make those guarantees, and we try and teach you to make better choices for yourself and what your job will be in the future, and to develop a philosophy of life, which is exactly what Arthur talked about. His speech really made me think of that differentiation, and I think that's the right one.
So you cited the great progress with the global poverty and the percentage of people that have no longer on less than $1 a day. And I have a question about whether that particular definition of poverty is great. It means people aren't in survival mode 24/7, but it's still so poor. So, if we were to think together in these new innovative ways about what poverty really is, what poverty do we have and how do we address it? We're talking about solutions in the U.S. That poverty wasn't a few dots in the U.S. and Haiti compared to the rest of the world. So it's a little bit of not you, but the whole world in this conversation is kind of baiting and switching in how we're defining poverty. And it might matter if we define what we perceive in our country as poverty and got serious about that, as well as the striving for subsistence.
Yeah, that's a very beautiful point, and I appreciate it. The data I talked about were $1 a day or less, and it's an arbitrary distinction. I can tell you about $2 a day or less since 1990, which is 66% decline, according to the World Bank. Or I can talk about China, which is 680 million people pulled out of poverty since 1982, largely in spite of the Chinese government, because of globalization, free trade, et cetera. But I'm still on material definitions. And what we get to do in a great country like the United States, if we choose to do it, is to let's not expand our definition of poverty, by the way, expand our definition of abundance, right? Which is 1 minus poverty. Is abundance. I want to expand that. And how do I want to expand it? Look, we've got to the point where we're a wealthy nation. I told you I grew up with people on public assistance. There was nobody except my family who had more than one parent in the home. And yet, we're rich by world terms. So we're okay, right? No, we're not. Tim just showed you we're not okay. He showed you we're not okay. And so that means it's up to us. It's up to us who are sophisticated about policy and educated and care about these things to come up with a better definition of abundance that we can use. Now, I don't want necessarily, by the way, I don't want the government to have a department of spiritual abundance. I don't want that, believe me. I don't want anything, I don't want part of that, right? But I want each one of us to remember that abundance basically, when it comes to, just on this conversation here, abundance really is faith and family and community and work. It's really not about money anymore, is it? Once we've gotten past the fact that, and by the way, one more factoid for your consumption. If you, as a family of 4, earn $34,000 a year or more, you're in the global 1%. That's a fact. And that puts it in perspective too, which means that the concept of abundance, which is the inverse of the concept of poverty, has to be much, much broader about the quality that comes into life if we choose to actually put it there and remember the things that matter the most, which gets back to our point that we made a little bit earlier with you, sir, about what we need that precedes capitalism and ultimately goes far beyond it. Looks like we're finished.
Okay, thank you both so much. And please join us for a reception just outside or behind the room. Thanks.